Hi folks, and welcome. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the workflow from Hypar back into dRofus. Specifically the notion of getting some of the information after you've done your blocking and planning in Hypar into dRofus so that you can use dRofus to do validation against what your original requirements were for the programming. So with that quick intro out of the way, let's go head over and take a look at it on the computer. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is take a quick look at what we have in Hypar. And you can see that we've done some programming here. Have not done the whole thing, but just a chunk of it, and certainly enough for our purposes. I've also gone ahead and made sure that all of the rooms don't exactly match the original requirements, just to try to make things a little bit more interesting later on down the line. And we've added some rooms, in particular some circulation spaces. So that's our Hypar model as it stands right now. So we're going to go ahead and flip over to Revit. The first thing is with loading data from Hypar into Revit, if you already have the dRofus plugin installed, you're going to want to make sure that you're logged out of dRofus. And so the quick way to check that is if you have the panel visible, you can go ahead and go to that panel and you'll see the log into dRofus button. If you try to make the panel visible, you'll be prompted to log in. So obviously at that point you can cancel and proceed to the next step, which is actually importing the data from Hypar. I should add, this is just a blank project created with the multi-discipline default template from Revit, so nothing fancy here, nothing special. Trying to keep it relatively simple in terms of how we go about doing this. So next we want to go to the add-ins tab in Revit, and we've got the Hypar plugin installed as well. We're going to go ahead and click on load project. In this case I'm already logged in. If you're not logged in, you'll be prompted to log in, and then you can select the project you want to import. So I'm going to go ahead and select our project here, and I happen to know that I want option 2, so we're going to go ahead and load that. Once the data loads into Revit, you can of course do additional cleanup or adjustments in Revit if you'd like. You can use Revit to your heart's content. Okay, so we've done some cleanup in Revit to prep our model. And again, this is all with the goal of pulling the data generated by Hypar into dRofus by way of Revit. So now we're ready to log in to dRofus, so we can go ahead and do that. And then once we're logged in, before we can worry about anything else, we should make sure we have the appropriate attribute configuration chosen and set up. Now, depending on your permissions in dRofus, you may have to speak to a dRofus admin about configuring an attribute configuration specific to the needs of this workflow. So I'm just going to go ahead and come in here, and I'm going to go to Revit room, click on edit, and this is the standard configuration that we often ship. This is way more than we need right now for our purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and click new, and I'm just going to call this Hypar Sync. And the first thing is our key attribute. How do we identify what room from Revit goes to what room in dRofus? And conveniently, when you imported the data from Hypar, it also created a new parameter for dRofus room ID in your model, and we want to use that as our key attribute to identify which rooms match together between the two applications. That's the absolutely most critical thing. The next thing is we want to pull the area from the Revit rooms into the designed area in dRofus. And so we're going to go ahead and click here, and we're going to link those. And again, this is indicating the flow of data, so we want the area from Revit to flow into designed area in dRofus. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull the room function number into the room number field in Revit. And that's because when you pull the data from Hypar into Revit, the Revit function number gets written to the Revit number. Problem is when we start adding rooms, that could end up being an error, and we need to make sure that's accurate and correct. Now, we oftentimes will recommend writing function number to some other parameter in your Revit rooms, but we're going to stick with the basics right now and not get too complicated. So once that's set up, we can go ahead and click on close and close that out, and then we should be ready for our next steps. As I mentioned earlier, we also need to deal with net new rooms in Hypar and Revit that don't exist in dRofus before we go ahead and do the sync. And so to do that, we're going to want to make sure that that dRofus panel is visible and available. And then we can go ahead and we can click on an existing room that was already in the program. We can see, there we go, that's matching up as we expect. This is the data coming from dRofus, staff lounge, etc. If we come here, staff lounge, so that's good. That's what we would expect. However, if we click on this room that represents a corridor, we'll see that that is not linked to dRofus, but we conveniently get this button linked to dRofus. So we can go ahead, click on that, and then we can click on the Create New button. Again, depending on your permissions, you may not be able to create new rooms. So once again, that's a discussion with your dRofus admin that in this particular situation, this particular project, you do need the ability to create new rooms. And so I'm going to go ahead and create new. Actually, I want to make sure I put that into the right place. So we're going to come down here to public areas and select circulation, and we're going to create new. And it's going to say this will create a new room. Continue, yes. So now we've linked that room, and I know that I've got another circulation room down here. I'm going to link this to dRofus as well. And then lastly, I think this is my last one that is not linked. So I'm going to go ahead once again, create new. And now we've created rooms in dRofus that pairs to these circulation spaces that were added through Hypar. So now that that's all linked together, we should be ready to go ahead and sync the rooms. But before we do that, there's one more thing that I want to address, which is this issue of the room function number and why we specifically set the attribute configuration the way we did. If we look at this circulation room that I have selected, you can see that we have a number that looks like a valid room function number. And in fact, if I select another room, for instance, if we go back here, we can see, there we go. And we can see this more clearly if we look at a small room schedule. We look at these numbers, we say, okay, these are all following a pattern. And we can see circulation fits that pattern, it's there. The problem is that unique sort of Revitism is that it will always create a new room number based on the last room number. And these rooms didn't exist in dRofus, so the big issue here is that this function number could not exist in dRofus at all, which is not terrible, but not ideal. Or more concerning is, depending on the time, it's the time that has elapsed since the user imported the data from dRofus into Hypar, did the work in Hypar, brought the data from Hypar into Revit, and now we're getting ready to bring that data from Revit or Hypar back into dRofus. And that in that elapsed time, somebody could have added new rooms to dRofus, and those function numbers could be in use. In which case, now we're going to have a problem, because now we would have conflicting or duplicate function numbers assigned to rooms in Revit as compared to what is in dRofus, because in dRofus function numbers are required to be unique. And so that's why it's important to set up that attribute configuration to make sure that these are going to be updated if you're going to go ahead and use them, Or ultimately, if you're going to write function number to a different parameter, wipe out room number and renumber them either by leveraging dRofus or by using some other tool. But the important part is to make sure data is clean and correct, so that you're ready to actually sync and move ahead with your work. So now that we're all set with our data, we can go ahead and go to the dRofus add-in, and up in the top left we're going to click on synchronize. We're not going to add images just to speed up the process, otherwise we can stick with the defaults, and we'll go ahead and click on the synchronize button. So that's going to update dRofus with our data. Once that's done, it tells us that it updated 48 rooms. So now we can go to dRofus itself, go into rooms, and the nice thing is I can select, for instance, our function program, and I can scroll down here and we can see here's our designed area, 6,000 some odd square feet, and we can see that the programmed is 4,000 some odd square feet, and we can see that the differences are being calculated for us, in particular the net difference, because we don't have a gross value for the designed area, we just have the net area. So that's we want to just look at this number for the time being. Additionally, if we go to the top here and we have the column designed area sorted descending, we can see that we get all these rooms here, and if we select them, we see we've got 48 rooms with design areas populated. And then the last thing, just as for demonstration purposes, I've got this custom report. It's a relatively simple one, but Designed Room Variance report. We can go ahead and we can generate this report. This is a relatively simple report that just graphically denotes the differences between programmed and designed areas. And you can see that there's a color scheme there that uses conditional formatting. So that's how you get data from Hypar back into dRofus via Revit. Now there's a couple of key points that we talked about along the way. One is this really only works for rooms and not if you've done any sort of departmental planning or blocking within Hypar. We don't support that level of data going through Revit back into dRofus today. The other thing to be mindful of is that you need to make sure you link any new rooms, and that's new rooms created in Hypar or new rooms created in Revit. And we talked about some of the key things to be aware of there, particularly the room numbering that occurs automatically because of how Hypar and Revit work, and just that you need to make sure that you've got the right data in the right locations. So if the Revit workflow is good enough for you, you can stop the video right now if you'd like. However, if you'd like to consider a workflow that doesn't rely upon Revit, then let's keep going. We're going to take a look at using some advanced workflows within Excel to go directly from Hypar, Excel to dRofus, thus avoiding the need to use Revit along the way. For some folks, this might be beneficial, and so let's head back to the computer and check out this other way of doing things. So for this workflow, we're going to head back to Hypar to make use of their Excel export feature. So I can come over here to the right, click on this Export Metrics to Excel button. That's going to generate and download the Excel file that we're interested in. We're going to go ahead and open that file, and then we can see what the contents of the workbook are. And so there are two worksheets that are included. Space metrics, which is a list of the entire program that was loaded into Hypar from dRofus, and then spaces, which are the specific spaces that have actually been placed in the Hypar model. And this is ultimately what's of more value to us and what we're attempting to accomplish today. The one challenge presented to us as we record this video in early 2026 is that the current spaces export from Hypar does not really include any unique identifying information for each space. So there's no ID value like we get with the dRofus ID in Revit, nor is there the function number which gets written to the Revit room number. All we really have is the name of the space, the level, which is sort of inconsequential to us, at least for today's purposes, and then the program or function structure of that space, which is actually important, and then the area placed. So that's where we stand today. The other thing to note is this particular program has unique room names per department. So for instance, instead of just treatment room, it's treatment room 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. If we had duplicate names within a department, that would make it a little bit more challenging. As long as we have unique names per department, even if the names overlap in other departments or overlap between departments, that's fine for what we're going to be doing today. Carrying on then, what we're going to need to do is go back to dRofus, and we need to export our room data from dRofus. We don't need anything particularly fancy here. We just need our basic room data. And so I've already got an Excel export configured here where I've got room function number, department name, subdepartment name, room name, and the designed area, which right now is going to be 0, but you'll see why we need that shortly. If I had additional levels of sub-departments or things of that manner, we would need the full function structure for what we're going to do today. In this case, we just have department and sub-department, but if you had additional levels to your function structure, you want to have the name of each of those levels in this export that we're going to put together. So once you've got that set up, easy enough to click generate. That's going to output our Excel output from dRofus. So I'm just going to expand these columns so it's a little bit easier to read. As expected, designed area is all 0s in this particular case. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this file in my documents here just for demonstration purposes. So neck video demo. So we'll save that. We've saved the file now, and what our next step wants to be is to get this start to get this formatted a little bit. So I'm going to click on any cell within the table of data that we've got here, and I'm going to go up to the Format as Table button here, and I'm just going to format this as a table. Now the nice thing is when you do that, it automatically finds the entire range, so you don't have to try to select the whole range. It's going to find the whole range of data for us. Yes, we've got headers, so we're going to go ahead and say OK. And a pro tip here is that when you create a table, you can name the table. I highly recommend naming your tables because it gets much easier later. So we're just going to call this dRofus data. And I'm also going to take the time to rename the worksheet as well. Again, just to be able to keep track of everything as we move forward. So once we've got that set, then we want to flip back to our Hypar workbook that we exported. And again, here in this case, we want to select all of our data in the spaces field. And in this circumstance, I just put my cursor down, again, anywhere within the extents of the table of data. And I did a Control A to select all the data. And I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And we're going to go back to our dRofus workbook, add a new worksheet, and we're just going to do a paste. And again, once we do that, it's selected for us. So we're going to do Format as Table. And this time we're going to name this as our Hypar data. And again, just to keep things clean and organized, we'll rename the worksheet as well. Should be noted that ideally you have different names between worksheets and tables because they can result in conflicts otherwise. So generally I try to keep those names distinct. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to decide what to name what. So now that we've got our data together in one workbook, we can then dive into merging the data together to get the end result for importing back into dRofus. One thing that we're going to need to clean up next is in Hypar, the area is, the column is labeled as total area placed. So we're just going to go back to the dRofus workbook and we're going to copy the name of this column and we're going to replace the name of our column here. And that again is to be aligned with dRofus to make the import process a little bit easier when we get there. So now on to the fun stuff, or the more challenging stuff. From here we're going to again just put our cursor or select any cell within the extent of the table. We're going to go to the Data tab in the ribbon and we're going to click on this From Table Range button. And what this is going to do is this is going to open up the Power Query window and it's going to load this table into Power Query as a query. And there you go. It says Hypar data, and we have all the data that was in the Excel file or in the Excel worksheet here. We're going to immediately turn around and click on Close and Load To. Note that I clicked on the split button, so we get this choice. And we want to only create a connection for this. We don't actually want to reload this data back into our workbook. Now we're going to go to our dRofus worksheet. Again, any cell within the extents of the table. Go back up to our From Table Range button, click on that. And now that has loaded our data into Power Query once again. So now we've got our Hypar data and our dRofus data here in Power Query, and we're ready for the next step. Before we move on to that next step, there's just a couple of things I want to highlight in Power Query beforehand. So if we select the Hypar data query, you can see that designed area. In the original Excel workbook, there's a unit included, but that unit is dropped, or that unit suffix is dropped when the data is imported. That's because in the case of Excel, that column is actually a formatted column of data where Excel knows that the unit should be applied to the data, so that it's not being interpreted as a text string, it's being interpreted as numerical values that a unit designator or suffix is being applied to by virtue of Excel's formatting. So that's actually really good and really intelligent on the part of Hypar and their export process. On the dRofus data side, actually in both cases really, once again, we know that we have unique room names in this particular case across the board. I don't even think there's overlapping room names between departments with our sample data here. So that again is really important. If there were not the case, we'd have to do some additional data transformation steps to mold our data so that it's ready for merging and import, but we don't have to deal with that today, and that just makes our lives a little bit easier. So what's really left then is to merge these two tables of data together so we have a single table of data that is ready to import back into dRofus and will give us those designed areas for the rooms that have been placed. We're ready to merge the data together, and to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to select the dRofus data query here, and then I'm going to go to the Merge Queries button, and I'm going to make sure to click on the split so I can do Merge Queries as New. That's going to pop up this little dialog for us. I'm going to come down here and select Hypar data as our other table. And so the goal here is to merge these two tables of data together to create a single table that includes the necessary data to import the designed areas back into dRofus. And so to inform Power Query on how to match these tables together, we have to define a unique key between the two, very much like creating the attribute configuration between Revit and dRofus in the plugin. So to do that, in our case, we don't have a single unique column that we can rely on as a unique ID between the two. And that means we instead need to rely on the combination of function structure names and room name as a means to creating a unique ID. And so what I can do is on the dRofus data side, I can select department, and then holding down my control key, I can select subdepartment, I can select room name, and you can see the little numbers there showing the order that I selected these things in, because now we're basically creating what's referred to as a composite key instead of a single key value. Down under Hypar data, we're going to need to do something similar, and in Hypar it's program group 2, and then program name. So those are our matches there. And as you can see, we come down here to say the selection matches 45 of 358 rows. So that's good. That's what we kind of expect in this case. Earlier when we did this sort of through Revit, there were 48 rooms in total that were updated into dRofus. But if you recall, that's because the 3 circulation rooms we added them into dRofus, but in this case, they're not there, and so they're not necessarily included in the match. So the last thing we're going to do here is, instead of left outer, which would keep all the rows from dRofus data and sort of include the data from Hypar, we're going to go ahead and select inner, and this is going to give us only those matching rows. So that's only going to give us 45 rows total, or actually we're going to get 48, I think, but in any case it's the data that we can import as opposed to the entire all of the rooms that we have in the dRofus data. And in this case, if there was anything in Hypar that we couldn't match up, that would get dropped or filtered out as well by virtue of doing an inner join. So we go ahead and click OK. That has now created this new query here, so we're going to just call this dRofus import, just again to keep track of things and make sure we don't forget about anything along the way. And then we want to actually remove this designed area column, because this came over from the dRofus side. It's all zeros, so we're just going to right click and we're going to remove. And then you'll see that there's this Hypar data column, and it says table, and it has this little split button up here, or expand button. And this allows us to then add columns from the Hypar data table that we've merged together with the dRofus data. And this is why we did dRofus data first, then the Hypar data, because all we really need from the Hypar data is that one column with the designed areas. Everything else we need to do an appropriate match for the rooms is already here. We don't need any additional information. So we're going to click on that split button and immediately unselect all the columns. We're just going to come down here and select designed area, and we do not want to prefix this because we know this is already named correctly for the dRofus import. So we're going to click on OK, and now we have the identifying columns from dRofus, including room function number and the name and the subdepartments, which we really won't need. And then we have the designed area, which is the data from Hypar that we're ultimately most interested in. So now all we need to do is come up here and we can just click on the close and load button, because this time it's going to load that as a worksheet, as a table. You'll note that Excel gets away with naming these things as the same. Again, when you're manually naming them, I highly recommend keeping them unique, in my experience. So now we've got this worksheet. It's right at the front here. This is on OneDrive, so it's automatically saving for me. We're going to go ahead and close this workbook, because if you have any experience with importing with dRofus, you know that you have to have the Excel file closed. So we're going to go back to the dRofus desktop client, which of course you are going to need for an import. We're going to go to our rooms module, we're going to go to import export, and we're going to go to import update rooms. We're going to browse to that file. So we've got our file selected. We're going to click on OK to select it. And then dRofus is going to prompt us, do you want to update the fields, we'll click yes. We're gonna have to go through that again, but you'll see that it did select the first worksheet. We're on row 2. In this case, we only want to update existing. Again, with additional or new rooms, you might choose to add, import new and update existing, but for simplicity, we're just gonna update existing right now. Again, it's properly found room, or column A is our room function number, and then we don't actually care about updating room name. We only want to update the designed area, and that's the only column now that's populated. We don't want to modify the names. And then once we've made those selections, we're just going to click on update. It's going to go through, and 0 rooms were imported, 45 rooms were updated. Click OK, and now we can see we've got our designed areas populated on those 45 rooms. Again, if I select all, well, it's coming up to 48, but we've got them there. And then the other thing is, if we come down here, we can go look at our logs, and we can see that the new value is 80, and that was set by me on today's date that we're recording. So now that the data is into dRofus, you can go ahead and use the tools in dRofus to start to validate what has been designed versus what the original program requirements were. And so this sets you up then to understand where you need to make changes or maybe scale back your expectations. The Excel file that we created is actually reusable. You could copy paste data to update it and have the Power Query refresh the output to import, or you could actually spend a little bit more time on the file and convert it into an advanced Excel template that could be uploaded directly into dRofus to be used for the import process back into dRofus. Now, with the Excel template, we didn't directly address the notion of new rooms, but it could be done with a little bit more work. In particular, you absolutely would need to have the room name column, and you would just have to take into account how those new rooms are going to flow into dRofus at the end of the day. So to recap overall what we talked about, first thing is we looked at 2 ways to get the data into dRofus from Hypar. The first one was using Revit, and we discussed in particular how you need to handle new rooms when you're using Revit to go from Hypar, Revit, dRofus. Also, again, if you're doing it via Revit, we don't support any sort of departmental planning that you might have done within Hypar. So Hypar supports departmental level planning, but ultimately Hypar, Revit, dRofus does not. And if you want to do it via Excel, that would also is beyond the scope of this video today, but it could in theory be done. The second method we looked at was how we can use Excel to get from Hypar back into dRofus, and leveraging Power Query within Excel to do that. And that removes Revit from the equation at the end of the day. It's a bit more complicated than Revit. Revit's mostly pointing and clicking and making sure things are configured correctly, whereas with the Excel Power Query route, we actually have to build some data transformations in order to get the data into the right form to be successfully imported into dRofus. The other thing is that with the demo we did today in Excel, we were relying on the fact that there were unique room names per sub-department in our case. Certainly with a little bit more time and effort, you could actually address duplicate names within the program and have it figure everything out appropriately. But again, that was a little bit beyond the scope of what we were going to cover today in the video. And so with that, we're going to leave it there. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much.